Thank you, Rajesh. Fantastic to be here. I'm Roger, by the way, and this is Peter. And we're going to try and gallop through the world of virtual human beings and how we hope that in the next few decades there'll be virtual copies of you that your doctors will be experimenting on rather than experimenting on you yourself. But let's just set the scene first of all, Peter. I mean, what's wrong with current medicine? Because people don't often think about this, but there's a couple of serious flaws with the way that we do. And I'm on the Medical Research Council in the UK, and I see this all the time. But articulate why modern medicine is a bit like trying to drive down the road looking in the rear-view mirror the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, the fundamental question there is medicine a science or a black art? And I think most medics and people who are trained in the area would recognize that it isn't totally scientific. A scientific domain has to be objective. That's a very particular aspect of science, which is precious amongst all of us in humanity, because it means it's an area where we can agree on everything. What I'm getting at if I say it's not objective is that maybe many doctors will have different opinions about things and they can't agree. And the more experienced they are, the more authoritative they become. But if it's scientific, it shouldn't make any difference. Because here in India and other parts of the East, you have different forms of medicine, traditional medicine, and those depend even more sensitively on the practitioner's point of view and debatably not scientific at all. But to come to Roger's question about why we have an analogy between making medical decisions and determining where to go when you're driving a car in a hazardous place like Jaipur or Delhi, when you think you have to look in front of you, but you spend all your time determining your decision by looking in the rear mirror. This is what we mean when a doctor has to treat you as the patient in front of them. What they're doing is trying to figure out how well you fit into their experience base, the information they have on previous patients, and indeed data on clinical trials, which, by the way, are overwhelmingly of white male Caucasian patients in the West and are being used to apply to patients in India, for instance. You can see there's a huge scope for doing better.
Absolutely. And so, in fact, most modern medicine is based on trials on people who are a bit like you, done in the past, and then trying to predict how you're going to react to that medicine. And it's some really popular medicines just don't really work. Forget about there are side effects, but quite a lot of very well-known medicines don't work for a large chunk of people. So medicine isn't personalized and it isn't predictive. So what we're talking about in the book is using digital twins to make medicine personalized and predictive. And this isn't a new idea. It's actually born, in fact, the term digital twin was coined by NASA. And maybe the most famous example of using digital twins is when Apollo 13 blew up most of the way to the moon, and they had to figure out how to rescue these 3 astronauts. It's still one of the most amazing space rescues. Now, they could have just said to the astronauts, we think you should do this. You've almost run out of power. You've almost run out of propellant. You've got to use the wrong engine, on the lunar lander instead of the main craft. What are you going to do? Well, you could get them to experiment in the spacecraft and use up valuable fuel, use up valuable electricity. Or you could use the simulators, which were back on ground in the United States, and try out various scenarios there to figure out the one that works, tell the astronauts, and that's actually, so in fact, digital twins really did save the lives of these 3 people. And Peter, digital twins are used very commonly now, aren't they, in engineering in particular?
Yes, that's very much the case. The Elizabeth line in London was constructed in that way. And I think a good example of this is actually Google Maps, that again, referring to your traffic problems, people will probably be invoking quite regularly.
You can tell the Jaipur traffic's really got to Peter.
Well,
actually,
I've been in India for the best part of a month. I've been all over the place, and I've encountered the same phenomena in most cities. But of course, you have to look at Google Maps as a dynamical system. It does provide you with real-time information on the state of traffic and the jams, and enables you to take decisions ahead of time about how to avoid them where you can. And that's a very close analogy with the kind of thing we'd like to see clinicians having in front of them for you, personalized, in order to make decisions. And I'm in India again talking to some healthcare providers who are becoming very interested in this possibility. Because as Roger said, the real problem is they want to be able to treat you, not Joe Average, so to speak. And that's an incredibly important and empowering thing. It puts everyone on the same footing. And what's more, again, in a country like India, I'm glad to see so many people are here, this nation is incredibly heterogeneous. And to think that you can apply some average prescription to an Indian person is frankly laughable.
And in fact, there's a mantra now, AI will solve the world's problems. So come on, Peter, let's do a thought experiment. I'm going to take all the medical data on the planet, I'm going to train an AI, and then that AI is going to predict how to treat you. Is that going to work or isn't it? Discuss.
So what Roger has just mentioned there, if you think back to the looking in the rear mirror, that's what AI is trying to do to replace the doctor and the way they work today. In other words, getting all this data on as many patients as possible, historically looking backwards, and then using it to infer how to treat you. That isn't personalized medicine. That's using other people's data to predict your health and well-being. And stated bluntly, that's manifestly not the way to treat individuals. So there's far more to come, and that's what we want to unpack here. Do you want to show the film?
I mean, just to be fair to AI, yes. If the AI was trained on your data, then it would be personalized for you. But there's a common mistake made in a lot of AI discussions, which is a lot of AIs are trained on population data. So they're always going to give you a one-size-fits-all medicine. So that's not, from our point of view, an improvement. Now, with a digital twin, you've got what we call a mechanistic model. It's a mathematical model of the way that the world works. Now, that sounds very fancy schmancy. Let me give you a real-world example of how a model can help you. Let's say you want to get around London. You know, I could give you more and more high-res satellite images of London to help you navigate from one place to another place. Or I could give you a tube map of London. Now, a tube map, it doesn't really look like London at all. But if you want to get around London, it's really useful. And so a lot of models that we're talking about, they can be mathematically trying to capture all the processes in the human body, but some of them are simplified and they still give you useful information. In fact, there's a joke among modelers, which is all computer models are wrong, but some are useful. And so what we're trying to focus now on is computer models that are useful. So we're going to show you a film now of a few minutes that gives you an overview of digital twins in medicine. It looks like Hollywood special effects, but all the twins here are based on physiological processes. Some of them have got billions of equations to capture the way that, say, the heart works, in the same way that we use these big mathematical models to make weather predictions and climate predictions. So you can think of this like a health cast for the body. So I wonder if we can just run this video, which we produced with the Barcelona Supercomputing Center. So hopefully the system will work. Cue video. It does. Fantastic.
I don't know if you can turn the lights down. It might make the more visible.
Our bodies are exquisitely complex
That's not
machines.
the soundtrack for our video.
In our efforts to care and improve them, we look to those
There
who
should be a
push the
voiceover
limits of
as
what
well.
is humanly possible, such as athletes.
Phew.
Now, you would say, what can we learn from them if every athlete is different? If they achieve peak performance through customized diets, training, and technology. As it turns out, we too are all different. That is to say, there is no single lifestyle, no diet, no medication that will work equally well for all of us. If this is so, how can we get the best out of our bodies? Now, imagine a virtual human, not made of flesh and bone, one made of bits and bytes. And not just any human, but a virtual version of you, accurate at every scale, from the way your heart beats down to the letters of your DNA code. You know that many drugs only work well on some people and can cause serious side effects in others. The reason is variations in DNA, our genetic differences. But we understand how these DNA differences change the building blocks of your body, the proteins, and we can simulate in a computer how drugs interact with them. By testing drugs on your virtual body, your doctor may eventually be able to test a wide range of drugs and select precisely the right one to suit you. But sometimes, choosing the right drug is not enough. We must also be able to deliver it to a precise target in the body. Take inhaled drugs, for instance, which can end up in the walls of your nose or at the bottom of your lungs, depending on the intricacies of your particular respiratory system. Using supercomputer simulations based on scans of your lungs, we can predict with high precision where particles will flow, and then design devices that can deposit drugs exactly where your body needs them. Well, obviously, mastering drug delivery means controlling the body's main transport network, your circulatory system. By simulating the movement of red blood cells and other cells, we can understand important protective processes, like those that prevent blood loss after an injury. Virtual humans could help doctors to plan risky surgery too. They could be used to work out how to reach an aneurysm deep in the brain that is at risk of rupture, which could cause a stroke. Surgeons could then try out the best treatment or implant to suit the location and shape of that particular aneurysm. They could even double-check that the implant will not cause problems, such as clotting, before they try it out on you. Physics, chemistry, and biology intertwine in your circulatory system to drive the most remarkable pump that evolution has ever created, the heart. To create a virtual heart, processes have to be modeled at multiple scales, from the contraction of muscle to the blood flowing through its chambers to the movement of charged atoms during a contraction. Virtual hearts already beat within supercomputers, where we can test the effect of different drugs or pacemakers, but also more fundamentally, to understand the way an individual's heart works. Your virtual avatar will not only be built in your image, it will also move like you. We can use it to calculate the forces and the mechanical stresses that are constantly induced on your bones, and predict the risk you will suffer a fracture. Doctors can also use virtual humans to work out how diet, exercise, or drugs can help those with brittle bones. And what if we go even further than treating disease, using virtual humans to prevent illness? Within a supercomputer, many virtual versions of you can explore small changes in your lifestyle and how they affect your health, aging, and quality of life. Virtual humans, helping you to figure out the very best that you can be.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And you can turn down the video. Thank you very much. So that gives you a kind of overview of where we're coming from. And I have to say, in the case of the heart, the virtual hearts are amazing in that they do look like real hearts and they do behave like real hearts. But let's just go through a few examples of where this kind of approach is showing real promise. And maybe the classical one that people often don't think of as a digital twin approach is in drug discovery, isn't it, Peter? And give some examples. You've done some trials where you've taken some patients and you've figured out exactly the right drug that individual patient should take, rather than giving them the one-size-fits-all. We've all been to the doctor saying, "Can I have an antibiotic?" And they say, "Well, try this one, and if that doesn't work, in 3 weeks' time, I'll give you another one." Well, they're experimenting on you. We don't want that. We want a digital twin to give you the answer. So, Peter, how do you do that?
Let's bring this closer to home in India. It's more exciting if we refer to the digital twins as your avatars. Avatars mean a lot of things to people in India. So it's your avatar that we're trying to treat. In the drug discovery domain, this is really right down at the bottom of the pile for a human. Virtual humans extend from molecule to whole human. And of course, we're concerned in infectious diseases with populations of them. So we have to envisage all of these scenarios. But going to the molecular level, there are some areas which are heavily controlled by the genome and the genetic code there. And that's the sequences that define the proteins that are in our body. And those proteins have three-dimensional structures, very precise nature, but they can vary between humans. That three-dimensional structure is the key to their mechanism of action. And if you want to inhibit something, it might be a viral infection or another pathogen like a bacterium, you need to know about that structure, and you develop inhibitors to block the action. And HIV, which has been a big problem in India, is a good example of that, because the strains of the HIV, more so than in the case of COVID, mutate very rapidly. But you would like to develop a drug that will deal with this disease. In the modern world, the pharmaceutical companies and sector doesn't have a pretty record. It takes 10 years on average, and of the order of $2 to $3 billion to take a drug to market. And when it works, as Roger suggested, it's rarely more than 50% of the population that it does work on, and you hope the remainder don't get damaged by it. But actually, only 4% of all those projects that get off the ground are successful. So there's an enormous scope to doing better. And in a post-genomic world where we recognize everyone's an individual, we don't want one so-called blockbuster. We need individual ones. So we need to have the sequence information, and we need to develop drugs that will fit, as we saw in that film, into the pocket, so to speak, or the active site of the protein that belongs to an individual. So there's a whole scope there for doing this stuff in silico initially, because historically, and this is still true today in life sciences and medicine, the idea that you can actually make predictions that are actionable using models and simulations is almost anathema. It's largely impossible to publish papers in leading journals, medical journals or life science ones, if they're purely on the basis of a model and a prediction. And yet that's exactly what we have to do to deliver personalized medicine. We have to make predictions which are trustworthy, have the confidence of the clinicians, and therefore they become actionable, so that we get to a stage where we don't have to do what happens in the pharmaceutical sector today, which is just make countless numbers of molecules, synthesize them, and test them all, but to reduce that time to solution. That's the sort of thing we're getting at in that context.
And you've actually done trials, I think, on breast cancer patients where you've selected the right drug for the individual patient. And when we say actionable, it sounds very fancy schmancy, but a lot of prediction in biology is 3 years after you've done an experiment. Someone say, I know how it worked now. But in fact, what we want to do is to come up with a prediction, say, over a weekend, and then tell the doctor a couple of days after they've given the data, the supercomputer, this is the right drug for the patient. So, Peter, I don't know whether the breast cancer one is the best one, or have you got another example?
Well, there are plenty of these things ongoing. When it's an infectious disease, it's easier because actually what you need is the sequence of the viral strain or the pathogen that's infected you and been incorporated into your genetic machinery, which means that you only need that sequence. Whereas if you need the whole sequence in the cancer case, which also develops resistance when you administer drugs, then it becomes slightly more, an information governance issue. But I would just say on the actionable side, a weather forecast is the best example of something that's actionable. Again, we need to know that in India, like I need to know if it's going to rain in London the day before I set off. The actionable outcome is I reach for my umbrella, and you've got a problem with smog and fog and God knows what else in places like Delhi. You need to know what's happening. The weather forecasting centers globally make predictions with supercomputers. This may not be widely known, but they develop models that are probabilistic. Roger said earlier, no outcome scientifically is ever known with 100% certainty. We need predictions of a range. And this is now translating into things like hurricanes, predictions of disasters days to weeks ahead, where you can detect some event developing and predict where it's going to hit land, and that can cause death and lots of damage. But if you know where it is, you can start to take evasive action. That's what we mean by actionable cases.
And actually, it's interesting that regulators are beginning to accept digital twin predictions now, and probably the most sophisticated digital twins of any organs in the body are of the human heart. And actually, this goes to work done in Oxford in the 1960s by a scientist who's still alive and functioning, Dennis Noble. And Dennis came up with the very first mathematical model of a heart cell, showing how you can predict its contractions and so on, which was modeling the way that charged atoms surge in and out of a heart cell to get those contractions going. In the 90s, he worked with Ray Winslow in the States to come up with the very first simulations of a piece of heart tissue in an old-fashioned supercomputer called a connection machine. And today, in places like Mare Nostrum, which is this supercomputer in Barcelona, and in other big computers around the world, there's a lot of very sophisticated heart models operating that look like the real thing and they behave like the real thing, and you can customize with a patient's own data. As I say, regulators are beginning to accept digital heart predictions. There are clinicians all over the world in Kings or North Carolina or wherever using this information on patients. There's a team in Oxford under Blanca Rodriguez who's shown that the predictions of a human digital twin are more accurate than animal testing when predicting arrhythmias, disturbances of heart rhythm caused by a drug. So Peter, I'm slightly dominating things here, but the heart really is the most extraordinary example, and there are lots of other organ systems, aren't there, under development at the moment?
There definitely are. The heart's been the subject of the most modeling and simulation here. I want to talk about the individual hearts that we're indicating there. They're all mechanistically developed. Imaging data is the fundamental personalized data that you build the model around. Those models typically don't extend down to the molecular level. They don't use genomic information, but they have the description you saw in the film, which are more macroscopic in character, but each person's heart is completely different from everyone else's. So what that means in the context of talk about animal testing in the first place, there's no point in testing on what are called animal models, real live ones, when we can make predictions of their behavior, the human individuals, much more accurately. But it then opens this additional sense of not just looking at one person's heart, but a population of those hearts in the context of in silico clinical trials. And in silico clinical trials are indeed what the FDA is about as well. They need to develop regulatory processes along the scientific method I mentioned earlier, which mean that the methodology you introduce is both reliable and trustworthy and objective, so that it's a procedure that anyone in the field will adopt and get the same answers. So you have to follow those procedures. But then they're interested in drug trials. Say it's in toxicology, which you were alluding to earlier. This is the state of play now in this field, that you can put together a population of individual hearts and probe them for the toxicological effects of some drug you're developing as part of the in silico development of drugs, rather than actually testing individuals.
In silico just means running a model in a computer, just in case you're thinking, what's he going on about? Sorry.
So yeah, so you've got all these individual people's avatar hearts there, and then you can subject them to virtual trials. And again, at one fell swoop, you see the benefit of that, because you as an individual could contribute your avatar to the clinical trial at no risk to yourself. And I know we've got Donald Trump back in power in the US, and he's very unpredictable. But the last time he was here, you may remember that he made suggestions about how people should deal with COVID while he was still in power. And before he got on to telling us we should drink bleach, he came up with another suggestion that was you use anti-malarial tablets, and hydroxychloroquine was one of the examples. And there were actually clinical trials of people perhaps who had tremendous faith in what Trump was saying. Real people joined in clinical trials to test whether he had a good idea or not. But you see what was happening with our Barcelona colleagues, and they've now got a spin-out company along these lines, is that you can assemble that virtual population and you can subject that to those trials in silico. And the data that come out of that are very similar to the ones that are seen in the real trials, with the obvious benefit that you don't have to be a Trump supporter to want to join the actual trial. And this is now becoming a really powerful paradigm for the future of medicine in that context of testing drugs.
And it's not just drugs, it's things like medical devices. You know, when you've got a heart arrhythmia, there are pacemakers. There are some amazing little implantable pacemakers now, as big as a tablet, that go in the wall of one of the chambers of the heart. With a digital twin model, you can you can interrogate the model to see waves of electrical activity surging over the heart to trigger a contraction. And you can see by where you put the implant whether it's going to helpfully nudge the heart rhythm into stability, or whether actually it might cause a problem. And that, I think Medtronic, for example, is doing that.
They definitely do that. So it's really becoming the way to develop, I think, designs for medical devices as well as a drug treatment. And you talk about artificial intelligence a little while ago, and it's not clear to me how widely in an audience like this people really understand the difference between what we're talking about with these avatars versus an AI approach. But it's fundamental to understand the difference, and that is that an AI system is purely dealing with statistical information. So you might think it's good for populations, but it actually is being used to treat individuals on the same footing. But we've seen that that's very unreliable. I mentioned it earlier, because overwhelmingly still today, the data sets that are available for training and the ones that were in the clinical trials for Donald Trump are overwhelmingly white Caucasian males. It's shocking, but even in that group, very few women are involved in clinical trials data. And you can address that very directly by having these models that bring women into play. The trial I mentioned in silico of hydroxychloroquine had equal numbers of men and women. You then see types of arrhythmia developing in women which are very different from men and known to be the case, and you can target individuals on that basis. That goes to the idea that you're never going to have a wonder drug that applies to everyone, but you can identify groups of people for whom it will be appropriate and others that will not. Mechanism is vital anyway. We need to understand what's going on in medicine to make it more scientific, not to just use statistical inference, which is basically what AI does.
And I should say there's another very common example of digital twins which are not labeled as that, but they are, which is when the pandemic was surging around the planet and different strains. Of course, digital twins could give people a bit of insight into how to control the pandemic. And obviously, I know it's still a very controversial issue, lockdowns, but in the UK, there were 3 sets of modelers who all came to the conclusion early on in the pandemic in spring of 2020 that a lockdown was pretty much the only lever they had to pull to control the spread of the virus. And I'm not saying that these digital twins of the way that viruses spread through populations are perfect. They're certainly not perfect, but they can give you a sense of how different measures, the impact of different measures from social distancing through to full lockdown. And for me, that's much more satisfying than a politician putting their finger in the air and guessing about what is right for the population. Isn't that right, Peter?
Totally. And the idea there with COVID was remarkable, given what I said earlier, that you cannot expect to publish predictive papers, theoretical ones, in biological or medical journals, but for a period of time during COVID, that's exactly what was happening. It was on the front pages of newspapers, certainly in the UK, with a colleague of mine called Neil Ferguson, for example, at Imperial College, making predictions of what might happen and the course of action. You could not use AI there. Remember, AI requires lots of data on previous cases. Sorry, guys, there were no previous cases, and you couldn't use empirical methods. You had to make predictions. And that's what we're getting at here, predictive methods, like weather forecasting for the immediate problem that a patient has with that needs to be dealt with, short term in time. The longer term issue is climate change, which is more challenging, but it's subjected to rigorous controls in terms of the predictive capabilities of the models. The International Panel on Climate Change has, procedures like the FDA to make sure the predictions are reliable and reproducible. So we look in the future to being able to make life course predictions for individual humans through their avatars, which is going to help us keep people on a path of wellness and well-being and anticipate things coming up far into the future, which will clearly benefit every single one of us.
I mean, we should drill down that into a tiny bit more, but of course it would be lovely to get a few questions from you. But I suppose one, in a couple of minutes, I've got someone itching to ask a question. It's going to be a difficult question as well, I sense it. But anyway, but one thing I'm itching to ask Peter about is that obviously he's doing digital twin research, and Peter's been simulating the way that blood moves around the body, and has actually been working on Frontier, which is the world's first official, probably China's got several, but it's the first official exascale supercomputer. That means it can do a billion floating point operations a second. Peter, just talk us through the virtual circulation work and how it's going to work with the heart.
Yes, so what we're talking about then is, remember, your avatar, it's captured by a whole body image of some sort of modality. You can then, through segmentation that's called in reconstruction, pull out the organs that you're interested in, like the heart, but the vasculature, which is the arteries and veins, for the whole human body. That's the large-scale scenario when you're trying to pump blood through it. Roger's effectively said, we can actually run personalized simulations now on these very large supercomputers. If you're interested in GPUs, because you care about AI, the machine has of the order of 80,000 GPUs, all of them put to work to run a simulation of a single human blood flow. That's one organ system, the heart's another, so we don't now throw those models away and try to build the cardiovasculature from scratch, not at all. These are components that are tried and tested, and the next thing to do, which we're active in, is stitching the two things together. So you then have a cardiovascular system. This is a global endeavor, so there are people who develop models of the lungs. I know some in Auckland and New Zealand who do this, and their lung model can then be connected up to that as well, and that's good because you get oxygen into the blood system that way. And stage by stage, we can build up what becomes this full-scale avatar. That's really looking into the future. But you've got to think of this as your property. I mean, it may come up in the discussion earlier about who owns the data. Fundamentally, it's yours, like your bank account. You should be able to control it and decide how you use it. You volunteered for a clinical trial. You provide your parameters that run into that clinical trial. You're not in danger from it.
And you can imagine things that we all obsess about, blood pressure. Well, with a digital twin model, you can actually interrogate the model to see tiny variations in blood pressure during the beat of the heart and how they vary across the whole body. You could look at a weakness in a chamber, think about aneurysms and so on. You can think about how a blood clot can move around the body and so on. So you can begin to interrogate the models this way. And I suppose before we open it up to the audience, I suppose let's just look a little bit into the future. And remember, these digital twins don't necessarily have to recapitulate you from the level of the organ all the way down to your genetic code. They can be simplified models, just like that tube map analogy I used. But the hope is, Peter, isn't it, that we could not just make one digital twin of you, but we would make thousands of digital twins of you, and you can run them in the supercomputer under different scenarios of diet and exercise and so on. I mean, and now, Peter, I'm going to give you the hard question. When do you think those kind of twins will be up and running to give us more insights into lifestyle?
Yeah, how quickly can we get that happening?
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is we've got some organ systems and some digital twins for disease cases already available and running. The vision you're putting in front of us is the one that's the driving one, that you have your entire avatar in your area of cyberspace. This is really futuristic. But what we're talking about here with a virtual twin, the avatar, the digital twin, is the combination of it as a digital representation matched against your own body and the data exchange there. That's an aspiration, but it's just using the scientific method into the future. And it will make medicine both better understood and more scientific in the long run. So it's a future I wouldn't like to claim when we're going to see the first individual human advertising themselves as having a full-fledged avatar.
Yeah. I mean, there are obviously ethical issues. We've alluded to them about data. There are issues about can you believe in the models, and that the fancy term is VVUQ. There's a lot of effort trying to make sure we can trust the models. And maybe one last thing to make you think about is that these models might even change the way that we define healthy. So in my case, for example, I hope you're thinking this, Roger Highfield looks jolly healthy, but my digital twin could be saying to me, you know, Roger, that 3 bottle of claret a night habit you've got is going to knock 10 years off your life. So am I healthy? Discuss. I think that digital twins will give us, empower us personally to give us real information about how to lead our lives in a healthier way. And remember, they are like weather forecasts and climate forecasts. They're not perfect, but again, they're much better and much more predictive than current generation of medicine. I don't know, Peter, whether you want any closing remarks, or shall we encourage the audience to ask us fiendish questions? There's lots of hands going up. Shall I leave it to the runners to select the questions? Go on. Yeah, fire away. Oh, gosh, you've leapt up, so you're very keen to... Okay, fire away.
Yeah, I'm a doctor by profession. I'm a physician. So I wanted to know 2 things. First thing is, when you collect the data for the avatar, does it include the genetic coding, everything about the patient, about the person, and does it get updated?
At the moment, the idea is to build these virtual twins, your avatar, in a systematic way. So the plan is to include such things. But whether they're being included at the moment is another matter. It happens that certain organ systems we mentioned earlier, like the heart, have a lot more data that can be fed into a reliable model. But the requirement should be, it's essentially, your avatar is a much more elaborate form of electronic health record. So it should contain all the data on you, you control it. And into the future, you may find that you can use some of that data in a predictive time course fashion as well.
In fact, there's a strict use of the term digital twin. There should almost be a dialogue with a true digital twin between your avatar and the real you. So it's constantly updating your avatar with the latest information, but that's quite sci-fi at the moment. But say if we mentioned that spin-out company, LM, doing the digital heart work in Barcelona. If you look at the LM homepage, you'll see that they show the individual digital heart of every single LM employee, which has been programmed, and scans of the heart and electrical measurements of their individual heart. So they've customized an off-the-shelf model, and that's the way it's being used at the moment. But you're right, in the distant future, your digital twin would have everything from your genetic information to everyday stuff like blood pressure and so on.
I can't hear you.
Sorry, we need the microphone back. Will phase 3 go away?
The whole point is...
Phase 3 clinical trials will go away?
Well, it's not going to... I mean, it's plain that at some point you have to engage with the real person, not the avatar. But the purpose of this is to reduce the risk to the maximum extent, and then be much more confident that when you do roll it out, you're going to give people something that won't cause serious side effects to them.
Let's have another question. Gosh, lots of hands. This is great. Runners, pick anyone you like and give them the microphone. Don't let me direct you. It's just going to slow things up. Fire away.
Hi, thanks a lot. I felt like I was watching a sci-fi film, and then you guys made it really simple as well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So I have 2 questions. One is, there are issues on sharing your phone number and email ID, and here we are sharing a digital twin.
Yeah.
So what are the ethical implications of something like this? And I just have one more question. I know people who are doing this digital twin to lose weight, or, is that okay?
Yes, about the information governance and security, I was hinting at that. This is a radical transformation to the way medicine is going to be run. And do you remember I said about your bank account? You have to think that you're going to own your data. At the moment, you don't. Your data is scattered in all kinds of areas, and it's held by hospitals and often by big US tech companies if they can persuade the medics and the governments to give them the data. This is a dangerous situation to be in. But what the position will be in, you have the same security on that data, your health data, as you do on your bank account. And there's no reason to think that that's not possible. People use banks online because they trust the security. And I suggest the security level for that is at least at the level that it should be for your data. You therefore choose when you want to give that data to people for particular purposes. And you don't allow this ridiculous risk of mass breaches of security occurring. And as regards weight loss and so on, that was a message of the video. It's about lifestyle choices, optimizing things for individuals. You're empowered to do what you wish with it. There are going to be people who don't want to know things that it might predict, and they are able to opt out, and that's a moral or ethical discussion as well.
I should stress as well that we're very much into things, VVUQ, validating things, proper trials and so on. I mean, I've been to some healthcare longevity meetings where sort of tech bros are airily talking about stem cell transplants and nucleosome transplants and this, that, and the other. A lot of it is untried, untested, and will be disappointing. So I must stress we are, although it's radically different what we're proposing, we do say that these digital twins have got to be properly tested, so we're getting proper predictions from them. Next question, please. Gosh. Go on, let's take this chap right at the front here.
I want to ask that human bodies and mind are constantly evolving, in the sense that a single coffee conversation with a friend might change the way I perceive things, my mind, and similarly a simple jogging or a session of meditation could change the way my body functions. How the digital models, if at all, are going to keep pace with that? And of course, there are some things which can never be captured.
Yeah.
In the sense that we have the weather forecasting systems for tens of years now, and they are still not able to predict the localized weather conditions accurately.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, the point Roger made it earlier, and I reiterated that, is that there is uncertainty associated with everything. Every aspect of one's life is controlled or to some degree dominated by uncertainty. It's foolish to claim that we're ever going to be in a position where we know everything. in science as well as other areas. The issue that is concerning us is, in a sense, broadly, what's called decision-making under deep levels of uncertainty. And there are things about biology and medicine I've indicated that make them not scientific, because of course we don't understand what's going on. This is an agenda to put medicine into the scientific category, where we find disparities between models and their predictions as the avatar and you as the real person. We know we need to understand it better, but the mechanisms will tell us what we need to do better. The other part of it about the psychology is, of course, related to brain and brain function. And we know the brain is arguably the most complex system in the known universe. We're not about to crack everything in the brain. But if it's about blood flow in the brain, aneurysms, arteriovenous malformations, problems there which can be dealt with by these physically based medical treatments, then you can deal with them now. The psychological element of this is in a very primitive state, but there are people trying to develop models for them. So this is not something that's going to stop. It's just an agenda in a framework in which to understand more and more of the human body.
Yeah, remember, a sophisticated digital twin will be in dialogue with your body. And already people are beginning to use what are called digital phenotyping to try to get an insight into your mood. To give you a primitive and funny example, they can use the accelerometer in your mobile phone to see whether there's a bit of a spring in your step, and they interpret that as you being a bit happy, so that's an indirect measure of happiness. So there'll be things like that. But it's important not to get too carried away with these things. One last thing on the brain. The brain is the Everest of simulation, but even with the brain, there are digital twin simulations of the connectivity of the brain. There's a trial that's been done in France using digital twins, looking at the connectivity of the brain in patients with epilepsy to plan surgery when drugs have failed. As a last resort, they want to remove the bit of the brain that is causing the epileptic seizures, and to plan that surgery, they make a digital twin to make sure they don't disrupt key brain connectivity. So although it's not, for technical reasons, we don't think your digital twin will ever think, okay, just before we all get too carried away. But we do think there are useful things that it can already do. Probably time for a couple more questions. So many eager hands here. Where are my microphones? Let's go to the, sorry, let's have one chap here and then we'll have one at the back. Sorry.
Thank you for your talk. Where are we now? It seems very promising as a predictive, at the least a predictive system, but where are we now? If someone wants to be proactive about their health, is there anything they can do now? Is there any institute or any labs, or where exactly are we?
I mean, if you want the lowdown on where we are in India, I think I hinted at that itself at the beginning. One of the things I'm doing here is talking to one particular healthcare provider, which is, I would say, at the forefront in India and probably globally in terms of trying to develop new technologies for medicine. And they've become very interested in this method. What we need, in actual fact, is to have this clinical patient component of what we're doing. A lot of the things like this, the models that we've discussed and seen on the video have had a huge amount of groundwork done in, shall we say, laboratory contexts and on computers, but they need to start entering into the healthcare domain themselves to see how this technology can pick up. And I'd say generally that's the level at which we are, and you can pick different types of disease cases which are more sophisticated. Some of them, like glucose pumps, are already available and up and running, and maybe one didn't think of them as digital twins with an avatar, but in fact that's how they're running. Acute myeloid leukemia is another case in cancer, and the story sort of goes on. There are bits and pieces that are working like that. We need them ultimately to be integrated, and we need a systematic way of managing the data for you yourself. Remember, in the end, we need this to be done on a population-wide basis, and to try to make sure each person is being treated on the same footing as everyone else.
So it's a very patchy picture, but again, the two important things are there are companies commercializing it, and there are regulators like the FDA who are beginning to accept this. So that, to me, says it's beginning to go from the from the laboratory into the clinic. The heart is probably the most advanced example. Let's have the very last question. Someone right at the back who feels the most neglected? Wave your hands. Okay, the lady at the back there feels very neglected. Can we get her the microphone? And apologies to everyone else who's been trying to ask a question.
I hope I represent a lot of people's question when I put this to you, but someone in the family is dealing with early onset Alzheimer's, and I was wondering if this kind of technology can help doctors and healthcare practitioners treat problems before they come in.
Yeah.
And avoid the onset, because I don't think there's a cure or there's a real direct way to resolve Alzheimer's.
Exactly the sort of question the clinicians were asking there, the ability to foresee things and take preventive steps well ahead of time. At the moment, doctors have to handle patients where it's known that there could be a horizon, Huntington's disease or something. Does the patient even want to know? It's not as if this is suddenly producing predictions that weren't being articulated before. Then it becomes an interaction between any given patient and the doctor as to how to handle this and whether even they want to know. They gave me examples of people who wish to remain in denial, and you have to respect that.
I think, sadly, that is all the time we've got. Thank you for those really brilliant questions. I'm so sorry we haven't had time for more. Do rush out and buy Virtual You. And also, I want to thank Namita, Sanjoy, and William for putting together such a spectacular, wonderful festival. It's great to be here in Jaipur. Thank you very much.